All right, everyone. Today we're going to talk about 3D printing, and I'm very lucky to have with me Sonita Lontoh from HP, and she's going to talk with us about 3D printing. So welcome to the video, Sonita.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. So my name is Sonita Lontoh, and I lead global marketing for HP's new business called the 3D printing and digital manufacturing business. I also happen to be an MIT alum. I was actually in Chris's class in 2004, so very happy to be able to share some of my experiences with you guys. I guess perhaps, maybe I can share a little bit how I even got here, because, when you think about it, I was MLOC focusing on supply chain, and then I got my MBA, and then like, hey, how did you even get into 3D printing? So looking back, I don't think I, was always clear with regard to which industry or which area I wanted to go into. But, right after graduate school, I had a few guiding principles, that helped guided me to where I am today. The first was I realized that I really love the intersection of new technology, new business models, and even a little bit of policy. And then the second, I also realized I wanted to work in an area that's contributing something more to society, changing something, disrupting something, rather than just selling a product. And so for the past 15 years or so, I've been focusing mainly on the industrial IoT space. So that's about sensor, smart sensor connectivity, big data and analytics, both with venture-backed Silicon Valley companies, but also with the new digital businesses of large global Fortune 100 like Siemens and PG&E. And it was about 2.5 years ago that I got this call from HP just out of the blue. One day they called me and said, hey, there is an opportunity to lead marketing for this new business, 3D printing, digital manufacturing. And to be honest with you, it wasn't an area that I was familiar in. However, thinking that in industrial IoT, I was really enabling digital transformation, primarily on the infrastructure sector. I viewed this opportunity as another kind of like chance for me to enable digital transformation for the manufacturing industry. And so I said yes. And here I am 2.5 years later. We launched this business about 3 years ago, and it's been quite a fascinating journey.
Yeah, so you came from outside the industry. You weren't an HP insider who took it over, and you hadn't done anything in 3D printing before, had you?
Nope.
So what you brought perspectives from the IoT world, the Internet of Things, which we've already talked about in this class, so you guys are all comfortable with that. How did that help you when you came to this new job? Was that a hindrance, or was that something that helped you do your job better?
Yes, I think it actually helped me to do my job better because there is, as I mentioned, parallel between industrial IoT enabling digital transformation for infrastructure and 3D printing, digital manufacturing enabling digital transformation for manufacturing. I think, Chris, what I noticed when I first got here, and perhaps this is a reflection of the maturity of the industry itself, I think a lot of people who grew up in 3D printing seem to be focusing a lot on the technology itself, meaning product features and capabilities, speeds and feeds, and not so much on kind of the business outcome and value that the solutions can deliver to the customers. Because when you take a step back, and I had this experience from industrial IoT as we were helping these large enterprise customers throughout their digital transformation journey, at the end of the day, I think when you take a step back and you look at it from this digital transformation perspective, all these new technologies, be it industrial IoT, 3D printing, what have you, at the end of the day, it's about enabling customers to achieve three things, I would say. The first bucket is what I call improved operational efficiencies. And these are about, cost reductions, more efficient systems, more efficient supply chain operations. I just bucket it all into this first bucket of improved operational efficiencies. And usually this is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit, especially for large, incumbents. And then the second bucket is to enable companies to deliver superior customer experience to their end customers or end consumers. And in the case of 3D printing, it's really achieved through mass customization or personalization of products and services. And then the last bucket, and this is, I have seen both in industrial IoT and 3D printing is the hardest, especially for incumbents, is to create new business models, create new business models that are enabled by these new technologies, new revenue streams that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And usually for legacy companies with big, legacy systems, this is harder to do, but we've seen some companies who are digital native, meaning, they're well capitalized, but they don't have any legacy systems. It's much easier for them to leverage these new technologies to actually create new business models and new revenue streams.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. What you described was almost the engineer's dilemma, right? If I'm so immersed into the technology, I can't see the forest for the trees. That's really interesting. I think that has parallels across almost any new product design. And your last statement, that makes a ton of sense, where the digital natives, they're not tied to historical things. It's easier for them to do something. But let me ask you a question about the 3 buckets you gave, because that's great.
Yeah.
If a company's doing this, they have to find an ROI, and usually they have to find a quick ROI.
Mm-hmm.
And is that usually just that first bucket, that operational improvements? Is that what people hang their hat on? Or do you find companies come in and say, you know what, I'm going to transform my business?
Yes. So, Chris, I guess that is a very interesting question. And what we have seen so far, it really depends on I would call it just digital transformation maturity of the company itself. Really no one size fits all, because each company has different environment, different business priorities, different budgets, different resources, so at least from my 3D printing perspective, some companies, they know nothing about 3D printing or digital manufacturing. Others, they have experimented with, a few things, and may even have some departments that have, a few champions that have used it for small applications.
Okay.
But then the most sophisticated, but usually digital native, the most sophisticated, they have not only adopted this new technology, but they can kind of like really integrate it into their strategy and really disrupt new industries, create new business models. So I would say there is really no one size fits all, but perhaps for most of the legacy big systems, usually what they do is the ones that are a little bit more sophisticated or mature, they usually have an office that's like responsible for digital transformation. But you have to be careful with offices like that, because the question is, are those offices, do they have the authority and also the ability from the businesses to actually implement whatever it is exactly, right? And so usually as a solutions provider, be it when I was at Siemens or here at HP, we found those champions in those companies, and then we convinced them to do a pilot project to prove a business case. And of course, you need to, prove the business case in whatever, pilot project that you have, in order for you not to be stuck in pilot projects forever.
Right. Well, do you think it's easier to sell this digital transformation to a company that's doing it for the first time, or one who's done a couple little pilots and that maybe might have a champion that's been there in a basement somewhere? Is it better to start with new territory, or someone who's they've been doing it a little bit, or does it differ?
Exactly. I think it is better with a company that they themselves have realized that they need to do this in order to stay competitive. Yeah. However, you also want to be careful to work with companies who have had bad experiences in the past, because there are many other companies, they have started this, and for various reasons, for complex reasons usually, it wasn't successful, and there were many naysayers inside the companies that, oh, we've tried that before, we've seen this movie before, it didn't work. So again, Chris, it's no one size fits all, like you just have to really understand. And then the other things that we also saw is, like, depending on what's going on in their industry, if there are just major themes and trends going on in certain industries that force them to do this, then it's a little bit easier compared to like when there is really no external factors kind of forcing them to do this.
So you raised a really interesting point about having to making sure that the champions actually have budget, have the voice of the business, because I see that a lot in sustainability, where there's a sustainability office, but it's really for marketing, right? Exactly. They do all this green stuff, but nothing's really taken seriously. But I assume that, does that happen sometimes with 3D printing or new technologies, or is that not as big of an issue?
It does happen, Chris, and usually that's when you work too much into only only too much with the innovation office, because usually what innovation offices are doing is they're looking for 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So they're playing with a lot of things, you know what I mean? But what you want to make sure is, let's say, even though we do have to work with them, because usually innovation starts with that office, but you do have to have the partner on the business side. So let's say in the 3D printing world, great, we would be working with the innovation office. However, is there a buy-in from the VP of production to actually take these new technologies as they're being proven out, both from a business and a technical perspective, to actually go into production rather than just staying in the innovation office?
That makes sense. So you have to look for someone who's ready to make the leap into actual implementation, not just doing a theoretical exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what trends and changes are you seeing that are necessitating or encouraging companies across different industries to consider 3D printing?
Awesome, awesome questions. Yes, so there are a few themes and trends that I think have created both challenges and opportunities for these companies, and I would categorize them into 3D as well, namely decentralization, the democratization, and decarbonization. Okay, so let's talk briefly about each one. So decentralization, we have seen increasing trends for manufacturing to be more distributed. Basically means the manufacturing happens closer to where the demands are, then necessitating the manufacturers to have to be able to respond to customers' demands faster and more just in time. So that's one trend.
Right.
And then the next trend is democratization or personalization. We have also seen increasing trend for customers and end consumers to demand products and services that are more customized or personalized towards their needs. And then the last one, and you kind of mentioned this, sustainability or decarbonization. We've seen trends right now for manufacturers to always look for ways to be more energy efficient, to be more resource efficient in order to achieve improved sustainability, right? So when you think about this, all these trends create challenges for manufacturers because they have to adapt not only their processes, but also they have to upskill their people, they have to rework their silos or structure in order to tackle the challenges, right? But what we have seen, some of those companies who actually want to get ahead of these challenges and turn these challenges into opportunities and perhaps reap the benefits that I mentioned before, the 3 buckets. And of course, everyone is different with regard to which bucket is important for them. I think we have seen them adopt, these new technologies like 3D printing, digital manufacturing, in order to kind of get ahead of the challenge and drive innovation and competitive advantage for them.
Okay. Yeah, I love that you always have 3 and they're alliterative, right? Decentralized, democratized, decarbonized.
Yeah. In order for me to make sense of everything, I have to categorize
yeah.
3.
Yeah, obviously 3's a magic number. You always got to have that 3, or 2 by 2 because you have an MBA, right? So
that is true.
So a lot of 3D printing initial adoption was in prototyping, right? I want to prototype something, and I'm sure that's still happening. How have you seen it advanced along the supply chain or along the manufacturing chain? Is it still predominantly prototyping? Or are you seeing it in mainstream manufacturing, or how are you seeing that evolve?
Sure. Yeah. So you are right, Chris. It's been around for 30 years. In the past, had been used primarily for prototyping. However, I would say the past 5 years or so, with the advancement of both the technology is getting better, but also the knowledge, of the people. They can design for 3D printing instead of the traditional manufacturing method. I think because of those two, we have seen more and more use of 3D printing for what I would call industrial applications. When you take a step back, 3D printing, the use cases are basically, again, 3 things: functional prototyping or just prototyping. Second is manufacturing aids, the jigs and fixtures, the tools. Yes. And then the last one, which is the most important and the holy grail, I guess everyone is still working towards that, is for final parts production, And at the end of the day, I think there has to be the additionality factor. That's what I would call it, for someone to want to do 3D printing, because the 3D printing enables new geometries, new part properties, and again, new mass customization that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So I have an example here, but I'm not sure if you guys
Oh, I
can
don't
see.
know if it's going to work. Is that an
Yeah, don't
iPhone
worry.
cover?
So basically, I have an iPhone cover that was 3D printed all in one go, using lattice structure, and it has my name embossed on it. Like something like that won't happen in a traditional manufacturing method, right? So there is the additionality.
Right.
So what we have seen, customers that have used this, usually there is some mass customization that they need. So, for instance, the dental aligner industry,
Right.
every product is different than the next product because my teeth is different than your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's a very good use case for 3D printing.
Okay.
The other one is, again, custom orthotics and prosthetics, because everyone's bodies are different, custom shoes. So for those applications that needs mass customization, it seems the business case makes sense. And some of the customers who are 3D printing in large scale are those customers in those
Got it.
industries.
So
However,
those are still, there's a product line run of one.
yes,
One
exactly.
prosthetic, one.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. But then on the other side, for legacy systems, we've also seen, perhaps not in such large a scale, but it's getting there, is with automotive. So
Huh.
with the advent of new automotive platforms, especially for electric vehicles and for autonomous vehicles, there will be more automotive parts that will be 3D printed because they need to reduce the car weight to increase the car efficiencies.
Got
And
it.
in some cases, even creating customized, products inside the car, such as customized seats, again, with lattice structure and meshes and things
Okay.
like that. And so for that, we're working with some of the largest auto companies in the world, like Volkswagen and all that, to kind of like be their trusted solutions partner as they go through this digital manufacturing journey.
So for that case, it's not a production run of one, it's production of thousands, but it's
Sure.
because the design can only be done in 3D printing that enables you to have whatever the criteria, a lower weight, lower density, or something like that? Okay.
Exactly, yes, because 3D printing actually use way less materials,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have new design, new geometry that wouldn't otherwise be possible with the
Right.
traditional
Got it. Got it.
method.
Okay. Any other interesting use cases or innovations where you've seen the application of 3D printing beyond just the prototyping, the runs of one? Are you seeing it creeping into mass manufacturing in any other ways? Any interesting cases?
Yeah, so the mass customization for sure, and then the lightweighting. So aerospace is another
Yes.
industry where it makes sense because like they need to lightweight a lot of things, but of course the requirements are much higher too because you have to have fire retardant and things like that because before you can go into the plane. And then the other applications would be medical, Chris. Again, medical, just because there is that mass customization aspect of it, that everyone's body is different. So, each case is different than the next case.
Because I know there's a famous case with GE with their
Yeah,
LEAP engines where they're converting the fuel nozzle and it's taking what was 17 or whatever separate machine parts.
4, 5, yeah.
And so, but when I was talking to them, because they're based here in Boston now, we went and talked to them and they said that actually, even though there's 3D printing, there was always traditional finishing. Like the 3D printing wasn't by itself. It was part of the solution, not the whole solution. Are you seeing that as well?
That is actually very true, Chris, because whatever you 3D printed, it would be raw and it has to be finished, and a lot of the finishing are still unfortunately manual. So I think one of the things that the whole industry needs to work on is to automate, the finishing. They call it post-processing. So after it comes out of the printer, so our printer base is powder based. So after you take it out of the printer, there's all this powder needs to be clean. And then once it's clean, it needs to be, depending on what it is, needs to be painted, needs to be basically post-process, and that process is still manual today in most cases. But as you can imagine, if you want to scale, that process has to be automated.
Right. So it's funny. The only thing I have that's 3D printed is my dog. There's a place that'll 3D print your dog. I'll have to send you a picture. I've got one of our last 3 dogs. Little 3D printing.
Oh, how funny. Yeah, but those are use cases too. But of course, it's the more kind of
Yeah,
play consumer, not
absolutely,
industrial.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is a supply chain course, and everyone who's listening to this video is taking a bunch of supply chain classes. So what do you see as the impact of 3D printing as it progresses on supply chains?
Yes, there are a few impacts. I would say the first that came to mind, especially after this COVID-19 situation, is really about that enabling distributed manufacturing to help with supply chain resiliency. So what's
Mhm.
interesting, Chris, is I think for the longest time, this industry has been talking about, hey, the potential of 3D printing to
Right,
enable distributed manufacturing. But then when COVID happened, especially in the first, I would say 2, 3 months of COVID,
right.
there was supply chain disruption that
Yep.
happened, and then there are all these mission critical applications that people need, hospital needs all over the world. And that was the time that I felt, even from HP perspective, that the whole industry really, was presented with both this challenge and opportunity to actually prove the business case.
Mm.
From our side, I'm actually happy and humbled to be able to share with you guys that HP, together with our ecosystem partners and customers, we were able to quickly design and 3D printed more than 4 million mission critical parts,
Wow.
including PPEs,
Right.
face mask, face shields, ventilator parts, respirator parts, nasal swabs. Nasal swab is actually a very complicated applications.
So
And
Sunita, let me ask you, why would they have to be 3D printed? Was there something about the design or the decentralization? What made it that, oh, this should be 3D printed?
because it couldn't come from China to
Ah,
wherever it was needed,
right,
because the paradigm of current mass manufacturing is you manufacture somewhere in
right,
large quantity because of the economics, and
right.
then you ship it everywhere. But then during COVID, there are so
Got it.
many of these different places in Spain, in Italy, even here in the United States. They needed something and they just couldn't get it. They couldn't get enough.
Right,
Like
right.
the numbers, just the volume that they needed was a lot, and they just couldn't get it. So that was one. Just Chris, it was like playing itself out in like life, right? And then what we were hoping, though, that it's not just a one-time deal, but it really can help enable the paradigm shift of thinking, especially as industries and government institutions try to
Mhm.
rethink their manufacturing systems and supply chain network, right? But in addition to distributed manufacturing, there are a couple other impacts, I would say. Like the second is that mass customization. So you can basically produce things in accordance to the specific customer requirements, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing also, you will be able to reduce complexity. You mentioned it with the
Mhm.
leap engine, reduce complexity and time to market, because instead of waiting for a few months, you can produce it quickly, go quickly into market. And then the fourth thing is you can be more resource efficient because 3D printing truly use less materials.
And
And
also, but it's moving less, you're not shipping components around, you're shipping raw materials, right?
yes,
Okay.
and with that, the last thing, actually, that's a very good transition to the last thing I was going to say. The last thing is, I think it also helps rationalize inventory and logistics
Yeah.
because of the on-demand local nature of manufacturing that will obviate the needs for excess inventory, excess warehousing, and in some cases, transports of
Sure.
goods across continents or across countries.
Well, great, great, awesome. Well, let me ask one last question that has nothing to do with 3D printing. Because you're here, you've been successful, and you're an alumnus, I want to ask if you have any closing words of wisdom for anyone taking this course for the idea of working in disruptive technologies or in this industry. Any quick words of advice?
Sure, sure. I would say, okay, couple words of advice. I think first of all, just realizing that life is a journey, because I don't know, like at least when I was young, Chris, I thought like, wow, I have a
What do you
destination.
mean when
So
you were young? You're still young. Come on.
no, but when I was young in your class, I think just accepting life as a journey. So what's most important is to learn and contribute throughout the journey because it's not a destination, right? But couple guiding principles. I think one is to embrace change and
Mhm.
have a growth mindset, because if anything I've learned, the only thing that's constant is change,
Yes.
and sometimes you even have to disrupt yourselves before others disrupt you. Okay, you just have to disrupt yourself. The second is to learn from your mistakes. I don't know what the culture is at MIT these days, but I think sometimes I've seen people are afraid of making mistakes. They
Hasn't
want,
changed. Hasn't changed.
and
Everyone's a
I think,
valedictorian. Everyone's scared of making a mistake.
yes, and I think that is a misnomer. I think don't be afraid to make mistakes as long as you learn from it. And if you're not making mistakes, that means you're not actually going outside of your comfort zone, and that is the biggest mistakes of all. Okay. And then I would say the third thing, probably just, hey, celebrate small victories. Some people wait for these big glorious things before they celebrate, but the glorious things don't happen that often. So celebrate the small victories to know that you're on the right path. And last but not least, this is just my thing, Chris, because of, as I become more established, I
Yeah.
mentor and sponsor young people. I think it's like, think of how you can combine what you like, which is your passion, because I think a lot of young people these days, they just focus too much on the passion part, I think, which is important. But think of how you can combine that passion with your skills, which is what you're good at, and most importantly with your purpose, which is contributing something more to society.
Yes.
So that
All
would
right.
be my advice.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us. I appreciate it, Sunita.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chris.